Dry set mortar, commonly referred to as thinset. What kind of thinset you should use for what kind of surface and what kind of tile. There's two main types. There's modified and then there's unmodified. Well, unmodified thinset, in its simplest terms, is just basically sand and Portland cement with a bunch of other components in it, but it's basically that. Modified thinset, it has the sand, the Portland cement, and polymers in it. The polymers in the mortar are to promote better curing, better adhesion, and help with the curing process. So the crystals, as they grow in the mortar, and that's what mortars do, is they grow crystals and they intertwine and they penetrate into the surfaces and they create a bond. The polymer modified thinsets are designed to retain moisture to help that happen better. Plus they add an adhesive quality to the thinset. An unmodified mortar just only depends on the crystals growing to penetrate into the substrate. So why does that make a difference? Well, depending on the substrate you're going over and the tile you're going over, you may need a mortar with a higher adhesive quality than just a regular thinset mortar. So where do you use an unmodified mortar? Well, unmodified mortar almost completely disappeared in its use until Schluter came along and they had their uncoupling membranes and the waterproofing sheet membranes that required an unmodified mortar because tile was set between impervious substrates and the modified mortars weren't drying out. Now there's been a development since that actually was the case, because now there's been improvement in mortars. Well, that's not so much of a problem anymore. If you're looking to use a mortar and you to buy a particular mortar and you get confused when you go in the store, it'll say the mortar to be used on plywood, used for ceramic tile, for porcelain tile, and to list a bunch of the substrates that you can use if you mix it with this or mix it with that. If you're looking for an unmodified mortar, because that's what you want to use and that's what you've been told to use, you're going to look for this standard on the bag. It's going to say ANSI A118.1. That's an unmodified mortar, and it actually has very limited uses. Most people will use a modified mortar. Now, modified mortars are three basic standards. There's A118.4, which is the lowest tier, A118.11, which is actually EGP mortar, exterior grade plywood, which is a better polymer modified mortar that will adhere to plywood. If you need to install a membrane, or even if you're going to install tile directly to plywood, you have to use the A118.11 mortar. And don't get confused with A118.1, which is unmodified. If you use an A118.4 mortar on plywood, it'll stick to the tile, but it won't stick to the plywood. When you go into a store and you're looking for a thinset and you don't know which one to use, just remember, 0.4 is not good for plywood, and 0.11 and 0.15 are good for plywood. And it'll always say on the bag, it'll always say meets or exceeds ANSI A118.4. And then if it's a better, it'll say meets or exceeds ANSI A118.4 and A118.11. So a thinset that's an A118.15, for example, will also be 0.11 and 0.4. Why do you need different thinsets anyway? Well, it depends on the substrate you're going over. If you're going to install, say, a ceramic tile on a concrete floor, then you could probably use an unmodified thinset directly on the concrete floor, and it'll stick to both, because the concrete's very porous, the ceramic tile is porous, and the crystals can grow and penetrate into both surfaces, and you get a great bond. It will have no flexibility, but you'll get a great bond. Another thing you would use an unmodified thinset for would be if you've got a concrete floor and you want to install, say, Schluter, you can use an unmodified Thinset to install your uncoupling membrane to the concrete floor, and you get a very good bond. An unmodified mortar has very limited uses. If you're going to be using an unmodified mortar, then be sure that that's exactly what you need. Mortars that you're probably going to be using for most installations are going to be modified. The glue that holds your project together is a Thinset mortar. So if you go cheap on that, where a better mortar would hold, maybe a cheaper mortar won't. The three standards for modified mortars are ANSI A118.4, A118.11, and A118.15. The top is the 0.15. The bottom is the 0.4. If you're installing a tile on a cement board, you want to use a modified mortar, and especially if it's porcelain tile. How do you tell the difference between a ceramic and a porcelain tile? Well, for one, porcelain is denser and it's less absorbent. Ceramic is softer and it's more absorbent. The tiles are categorized by the amount of water they absorb. So a porcelain tile absorbs very little water. So you need a very good Thinset to be able to adhere to it. A ceramic tile will absorb a lot more water, so a lower grade Thinset will adhere to it very well. It's about those crystals intertwining and growing and penetrating into the surface. That's how it bonds. If you've got something that's very dense, it's harder for the crystals to go in there, so you need a more adhesive quality to the Thinset to get a good bond. If you're installing a ceramic tile, like say a subway tile, ceramic subway tile, you could use a lower grade Thinset. If you're installing a porcelain tile, you probably want to go to a higher grade Thinset. You have the A118.4, which is a modified Thinset, but it's the lowest grade Thinset. If you're going to install a tile or a membrane on a plywood subsurface, then you can't use the A118.4. That is not designed to adhere to plywood. You have to step up to the ANSI A118.11 or better, which actually ANSI A118.11 is actually EGP, which means exterior grade plywood. So it's designed to adhere to exterior grade plywood. You could go up to the ANSI A118.15. In my opinion, it's better to always use a better grade of Thinset, so you know you got a very good bond. Now, the 0.11, as I said, is for to be used over the minimum standard that you can use over plywood that will adhere to plywood. And then you got the 0.15. The 0.15 is referred to as an improved polymer modified mortar. What does that mean? Improved, it's better. So you could use that also over plywood. Another thing polymers add to Thinset, it gives it flexibility. If you've got an unmodified mortar, there is no flexibility. It's just a rigid material. If you've got a polymer, and depending on the type and kind and quantity of polymer, it adds flexibility and adhesive quality. So why would you need a 0.15 mortar? Glass tile is a very difficult material to bond to. So you need a really good Thinset mortar to bond to that. So you would use a 0.15, an ANSI A118.15 mortar. You got to be certain that is actually good for the glass tile. So know, for example, a Schluter Allset, which is an ANSI A11.15 Thinset, they do not recommend that for glass tile. But if you get like Tech Superflex, that is actually something that will be commonly used to install glass tile. They're both 1.15 mortars, but one is recommended, the other one is not. So 0.15 has a better adhesive quality and will stick to usually glass. They also make Thinset mortars that are specifically made for glass. The polymers in the Thinset add flexibility and more adhesive quality to it. The more difficult the substrate is to adhere to, the better quality mortar you need. Beyond these standards of A118.1, 0.4, 0.11, and 0.15, There are additional qualities that can be added to the Thinset to make it useful for other types of setting situations. For example, if you get a mortar that has a T at the end, so it's going to say it's got an A118.15T Thinset. That means the Thinset is a no-sag Thinset. The T stands for thixotropic, which means that it doesn't sag, it'll hold the tile up or help keep it from sliding down the wall if it's on a vertical surface. If you're going to be installing a large format tile, which today most tiles are pretty big, the most common size tile is a 12 by 24. So if you're going to be using a large format tile, and just quickly, the definition of a large format tile is any tile that has, any ceramic or porcelain tile that has one side longer than 15 inches. A lot of manufacturers will make Thinsets which have a T, which is at the end, which is a no-sag Thinset, and the properties on those mortars also allows for hold larger, heavier tiles better so that they don't sag. You can use a large format tile mortar. You can also use it for a smaller tile, but you probably don't want to use a regular mortar for a large tile. It'll stick to it, but it's probably better if you use Thinset mortar designed for a larger tile. And another thing about a regular mortar and an LFT mortar, the bond coat on an LFT mortar can be thicker than that on a regular mortar. So if you've got a regular Thinset mortar, you can only go so deep. They all vary, but they're usually within like a quarter inch, maybe 3/8 thickness, that you can use a Thinset mortar before it starts to lose its ability to hold its shape and it shrink and create problems. So typically with a large tile, you're going to use a bigger trowel with a thicker bond coat. So you want to use a large format tile mortar. They're referred to as LFT or LHT, large format tiles or large and heavy tiles. Those can have thicker bond coats. Some of them can go up to almost 3/4 of an inch. I wouldn't push it that far, but you got to be very careful when you're picking your mortar to make sure that you use the right one. So they can have thicker bond coats, and they won't shrink and sag. So the T is for no sag. And then they've got E, like if you find an E at the end. And you can have a Thinset that's got T and E. So T means no sag, and E means extended open time. You look on the bag, and it can have a T, or it can have an E, or it can have an F, which is for fast setting. If you look on the bag, it's going to have a pot life and an open time. The pot life can vary greatly depending on the mortar that you're using. So what does pot life mean? You mix up the Thinset and you start using it. The pot life is the amount of time that will remain good in your bucket. Some will be an hour, some will be up to 4 hours of pot life, and anywhere in between. Ambient conditions and temperature will affect the pot life. So if you're working in an area where it's 50 degrees and it's damp, you're going to get a very good pot life. If you're working in a hot area where it's 100 degrees and it's very dry, pot life's going to be reduced. Same for open time. Open time is once you spread the Thinset and you're ready to install your tile, the open time is the amount of time that Thinset will remain tacky and you can install a tile. Thinsets are designed to have very long open times, and some don't have a very long open time. And again, ambient temperature and conditions will affect the open time. If you've spread some Thinset and you've gone a long way and you start and just place your tile, make sure that the Thinset is still good. So if it's skimmed over, it can happen very easily, especially if you've got like a fan blowing or it's very warm. What does that mean? So if you touch the Thinset and nothing transfers to your finger, then that has skimmed over and is no good. You got to remove it and start over and spread some more Thinset. If you touch it and it transfers to your finger, then it's still good. They have specialty mortars. They will all adhere to one of these standards, but you can get lightweight Thinsets, and those will have, depending on how they're made, will have better open times, better pot life, non-sag properties. So there's a million different kinds of Thinsets that you can get, but they all adhere to one of those standards. Check the standard and then use it for the appropriate tile and substrate. Never cheap out on thinset. It's always better to use a higher quality thinset. So another thing about these thinsets is also how you mix them. Some are very sensitive to the amount of water and the mixing time and the slake time and then the remix time, and some are not quite as sensitive. So always read the bag. You might get a thinset that says mix it for 3 minutes and then let it slake for 10 minutes and then remix it for another 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes. To achieve the properties that are designed in that thinset, you should mix it the way it describes in the bag. There are some thinsets that you mix and you don't let them slake and you use them right away. They all have one thing in common that you should never do. If you're using a thinset and it starts to get stiff, never add water to make it smoother and softer and creamier. You can remix it to loosen up a bit, but don't add any water to it. After the thinset has slaked, if it's one of those that have slake time, do not ever add water to it in any way. So what does this slaking thing mean? Slaking means that it's okay. So you mix your thinset and you get all the powder of the product all wet and it's all mixed in and there's no dry spots, and then you let it sit. Slake. What does that do? So what happens is the water penetrates into the molecules and it activates all the chemistry in the bag. Get all the components of all the thinset is all activated. Then what you need to do is remix it so you get a good mix, breaking them up and you're making them all mix with each other so that the product works properly. If a bag of mortar says it needs to slake, make sure you slake it. If you get a bag of mortar, mix it, you don't mix it for quite enough time, and then you just start using it, you're going to find that mortar gets stiff really quick because it hasn't had the proper mixing and the proper slaking, and it gets stiff pretty quick. If you get that same mortar, you mix it to the proper amount of time, and you let it slake the proper amount of time, and then you remix it, you're going to find it works much better, and it will have the properties that it says it has. So a lot of times people complain about a mortar that doesn't work properly. It's not because it doesn't work properly. It's because they haven't mixed it according to the directions. So that's another important thing. The point of this video is to make sure you use the proper thinset for the substrate and the tile that you're installing. If you use an unmodified thinset to install a tile or an uncoupling membrane to a plywood subfloor, you're going to have a problem. If you use A118.4 thinset to install your tile directly to plywood, but if you do that, the thinset will stick to your tile, but it won't stick to the plywood. If you use an A118.4 mortar to install an uncoupling membrane to a plywood subfloor, thinset will stick to the membrane, but it won't stick to the plywood. You have to use an A118.11 or better thinset. The bag always has the standard. Know what your tile is and know what your substrate is and know what the thinset you need to use to make the two work together. If you do that and you mix it according to proper mixing directions, you're going to get the pot life, you're going to get the open time, and you're going to get the consistency that the mortar is supposed to have. Mortars also come in gray and white. They're exactly the same. There's no difference. It's the same standard. It's just a color. The white will always cost a little bit more than the gray. There are some materials that you have to use white. Like, for example, if you're installing a natural stone, you always want to use a white mortar. If you're installing glass, you always want to use a white mortar. The more chemistry in a bag, the more advanced it is, the more it's going to cost. Glue that holds everything together is the thinset. So you always want to get a good quality mortar